You're listening to Stronger After Stroke, the podcast dedicated to helping stroke survivors and their families thrive after experiencing stroke. Ready to tackle those tough questions and explore the survivor journeys of others navigating life after stroke? Well, sit back and enjoy this episode of Stronger After Stroke, presented by the Norton Neuroscience Institute Comprehensive Stroke Center and Resource Center.
Hello and welcome to the Stronger After Stroke podcast. I'm your host, Rosa Hart, and here at the Norton Neuroscience Institute, we want to make sure our patients that are stroke survivors and their families have the knowledge that they need to have their best quality of life after stroke. So today we're going to talk about driving and the important considerations to take when you are re-entering the conversation around driving after having a stroke. So today we have a visiting attorney speaking to us. This is Cameron Fathauer. Thank you for being with us today, Cameron.
Thank you, Rosa. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So thank you for bringing your expertise as an attorney to speak to the legal considerations. And then I believe you have a personal connection to driving back after brain injury that you may want to share with us as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty special. I'm in a dual kind of function here with personal experience and legal experience. It was about 9 years ago when I was hit by a car as a pedestrian and suffered a severe diffuse axonal brain injury down to my brainstem, had a craniotomy. I was in a coma 2.5 weeks and had cranioplasty a few months later, and had to go through rehabilitation, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, all of that. I did all of that in Indianapolis at RHI. And part of that in this context is the occupational therapy that I did to get recertification to be able to drive. And that was an interesting process similar to driver's ed. And so going through that, and I'm happy to speak on the relevance in that experience, but in addition to the legal significance of the brain injury and recertification in Kentucky, Indiana, and abroad.
Now, someone might look at you if they could see the video version of this and think you look way too young for all of that. They probably would have assumed you were an attorney before your brain injury, but that's not the case, is it?
No, I was in my senior year of high school when the accident happened, but I did do a very adult thing. I proposed to my wife a month before the accident. So I was engaged. I was 17, she was 19. And I was on track to go into ministry. And so the accident's what led me to an attorney in New Albany, Indiana. And I got inspired to go to law school, help other injured people. And that's how I met Matthew Shadd in New Albany. And he supported me and encouraged me to go to law school, and I went through law school, became a personal injury attorney in Kentucky and Indiana, and I work for him today. Yeah. And so it's really special. I've been an attorney for about 3 years.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate how you're paying it forward and taking the time. I know a lot of people appreciate how valuable an attorney's time is. And so the fact that you're willing to share this with us is much appreciated.
Yeah.
What is this that you are demonstrating?
Yeah, it was funny. I was in the elevator on the way up here, and this lady came into the elevator and she said, "You're holding a skull like it's Halloween or something." And I just shared my story, and she was very encouraged by it. And so this is a 3D model, exact replica of my natural skull following my brain injury, which resulted in several skull fractures and, just the loss of the parts of the skull. And so I keep this on my desk as an object of inspiration for me, and just memento mori for the grace I've been shown in my life. And I published a book that came out a few months ago about the story, and Matt Shadd, that attorney who worked my case, he wrote the foreword, and the letter of recommendation he wrote for me when I applied to law school was in the appendix. I say he hugs the book, has a bookend sense. It's really sweet. And just kind
Not the way you really commonly hear an attorney described, but
yeah.
We should definitely make sure he listens to this.
But yeah, so the book just talks about the journey, but deeper existential insights and things I learned about identity and what it means to be human, and suffering, and holding on to faith in other people, and navigating all of that.
Oh, that's great. Well, let's dive into what we've learned legally from all of this, from either a combination of your legal training or your legal research in preparation for this episode, or your own experience. So, what are the legal requirements for someone to resume driving after a brain injury?
So in Kentucky, there needs to be a period of no seizures, no loss of consciousness, no blackouts, no serious altered states of mental consciousness for a period of at least 90 days.
Okay.
And that needs to be documented. And if that's the case, then they can go through the recertification process, assuming there was a brain injury reported by a physician or reported by the individual to the relevant department.
So, are there mandatory medical evaluations or any certifications that are needed before a person can legally drive again after having a stroke?
It's a good question, because there's like the way things should be and the way they are, because there isn't a state requirement in Kentucky and in Indiana and other places as well to report these brain injuries to like the BMV or the Kentucky Cabinet of Transportation. There isn't a necessity. It's the doctor's discretion to report that depending on the circumstances and how the patient's doing.
Yeah, and the severity of
severity of the injury, right? So there's not like a black and white rule for how to handle that. But if it is reported, the physician does report it. What's good to know is that physicians or medical providers that report these are not subject to liability. That's important for them to know, that there's no, like, they're not liable if they report it or if they don't report it. But
meaning
if something goes wrong or an accident or has a stroke while driving, they're not going to get in trouble for reporting it or not reporting it.
Okay.
And so they have that protection as well. When it is reported, there is the certification process. You need that 90-day period. And then you also need to be certified through an occupational therapist who will then work with the driver's assistance programs here in the state.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that they could report or not report at the medical provider's discretion. And is that just in regards to a regular driver's license that most people have? What about a CDL or a driver's license for work purposes, like bigger vehicles?
Yeah, so CDL drivers, there's much higher scrutiny, which there should be because they're driving giant missiles on the interstate, on the highway, and school buses, these large vehicles that can. And so all these restrictions and rules on driving are not there to punish anybody.
Right.
They're not there to insult or punish people. They're just there for public safety.
Right.
We're just trying to look out for everyone's best interests and welfare. And so it can feel like a deprivation of your right to work or your right to drive. But there is the public safety consideration that needs to be in everyone's mind. Now, with CDL, as I said, there's a heightened standard of scrutiny for getting recertified, and it's about 10 years, so you can get that licensure back, but there needs to be a period of 10 years where there's no seizures, no blackouts, no medication.
No medication preventing the
seizures, right? Like you need to be off of that. So it makes it really difficult, especially if you have things like epilepsy or those kind of conditions where it's just pretty recurrent and hard to control. And brain injuries, there are certain kinds of seizures. Like I had a seizure at the time of the accident, which is a good thing, and it's pretty common when you have an immediate, because your brain's reacting to the trauma. I forget what the term's called, but it's just it's a trauma-induced seizure. And if you have that one, it's good. It usually means you're not going to have more later on.
Oh.
And so that was the only seizure I had, was at the time of the accident.
Okay.
I mean, I was in a coma. I don't really remember any of it, but they said I did seize, so.
And then you mentioned there is some documentation that may be required in order to prove fitness to drive. So what would be kind of the checklist of that for Kentucky?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the particulars for the checklist, because that's within the medical review board and the driver's assistance programs, retraining programs. They have their own particulars, but it would need to be something that someone who goes through that program and then that certification is achieved, and then it's presented to the Kentucky Cabinet of Transportation, their medical review board, they would verify that you've gone through the program, you've gone 90 days without seizures or blackouts or anything like that, and then they would be the ones that give you the okay to go to the Department of the DMV. It's confusing because Kentucky calls it the DMV, right?
Yes.
Department of Motor Vehicles.
Correct.
Indiana calls it the BMV.
Oh, what does B stand for?
Bureau of Motor Vehicles.
Oh, so I've never been in Indiana long enough to learn that.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it's just
Interesting. All right.
So yeah, but they'd be the ones to certify all of that.
Okay. So aside from reporting liability, what liability risks does an individual person face, say a stroke survivor, if they resume driving too soon after their brain injury and cause an accident?
It's a scary issue because people after traumatic brain injuries or strokes, you can get really encouraged by your progress and your abilities, and you're like, oh, I can go out and drive, I can go out and do these things. But that's why they have the 90-day period where they want a consistent period of time to pass where you're doing okay, you've got stability, again, because of the public safety concerns. So with people that don't follow through with those protocols, do run the risk of getting into big trouble with civil penalties or potentially criminal penalties for driving too soon or driving without having, like you said, reporting the TBI, the stroke, or whatever condition it may be affecting your mental health to your insurance or to the medical review board, whoever it is, whatever state you're in, the right agency or administrative state about your condition. Because if you don't, then you run the risk of getting in an accident. And if you're in an accident and it causes serious harm to someone else, whether it's serious injury or death, and they call an attorney, like a personal injury attorney, and a lawsuit happens, then there can be severe civil penalties. And depending on the nature of the collision and who all is involved and who all is injured and how severe the injuries are, that can sometimes bring up criminal implications because you're driving without the legal authority to be driving, having that condition, underlying condition of the stroke that you knew about. You were aware, you knew, and you took the risk, and now you're going to have to face the consequences.
Gotcha. Thank you for explaining that. How might a brain injury, a stroke, or other brain injury affect auto insurance coverage and premiums?
Yes. So I mentioned a little bit about reporting to the government agencies, but also your private car insurance company. You want to report this to them because, well, the consequence of doing it is your premiums might go up, but it's better than losing coverage completely.
Because can they later deny your claim
they could deny your claim.
Never reported?
They could deny your claim because the contract of the policy might include provisions about failure to report underlying conditions or failure to report stroke, TBI, like significant things that can alter your health function, especially on a cognitive level.
And you don't want to give them any extra excuse to not cover things when you're paying for insurance already.
So this is why you hire attorneys. So if you don't report the stroke or you don't report the brain injury, then you definitely run even more of a risk of them not providing coverage, whether it's especially in this case, the automobile driving coverage that people, by law, everybody needs to have.
Yeah. So are there legal accommodations available for drivers with cognitive or physical impairments due to that brain injury?
So when you say legal accommodations, what do you mean by that?
I think I would be talking about, like, if a patient says, I have the right to drive and you can't take that away from me, for example, or, you're depriving me of my ability to live life if I can't drive, which, sounds like a solid argument, but like what legal protections do they have?
Yep. So there is what's called the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's also in short known as the ADA. And the ADA is there to protect people with disabilities, diagnosed disabilities recognized, through Social Security disability as well. People with these disabilities have a right to drive, right to work and function in society just like we all do. And so if your disability prevents you from engaging in the work or engaging in whatever other civil liberty there are accommodations for it. And so I wouldn't call them legal accommodations because they're more of like case by case. Individuals have certain needs so they can be able to drive, they can be able to interact in the workplace. And so
it's mostly to prevent discrimination, right?
Right. So that's the main thing the ADA is about. And so I don't believe there's so much of a right to drive. That's definitely not in the Constitution, but there are these liberties. And so work is something that we do have a right to engage in. We have a need to in society to engage in work. And so driving is obviously very important today because of, just how mobile everybody is today in our times. And so having the ability to drive is very, very important. And so today, though, with the technologies at play, we do have lots of options for people with strokes or people with cognitive issues and difficulties to be able to drive. They're called adaptive technologies. And so there's voice. You can drive just pretty much with your voice, instructing the vehicle to do things.
Now, that sounds like you would have to have a very fancy car for that.
Well, so it's not necessarily the fancy car, but there are like voice commands. You still need to hold the steering wheel, but there are voice commands that you can control the vehicle with. There are just hand, like almost like a video game. Just with one hand, you can control the vehicle. There are seat adjustments. There are obviously wheelchair ramps. That's pretty common accommodation we've heard of. And there are different, you can totally change the way the car looks based on your needs. Like the steering wheel, again, with the single remote. These are options and changes that can be implemented through your occupational therapist, through those driver assistance programs. By law, they have to accommodate you as best they can. I guess that's what's important to notify. Yeah, right. Is that they will work with you. They will figure out how to get you back in the driver's seat, literally, but also make sure it's in line with public safety.
Yeah,
keeping everybody safe. You safe. I mean, yeah, obviously you want to be safe.
Yeah.
But also making sure other people are safe.
Exactly. And so how can individuals advocate for themselves if they believe they're being unfairly restricted from driving?
So I mentioned the ADA and Americans with Disabilities Act and the rights that you can fight for and you're entitled to have under law. And the way in which you can, if you feel like your license has been rescinded or taken away from you without just cause, you yourself can file with the court, a local jurisdiction, or you can contact an attorney, or you can go directly to, in Kentucky, the Medical Review Board within the Kentucky Cabinet of Transportation. You can contact them directly. You can email them and explain your situation, lay out the facts, and say, like, this is what happened. And I don't think it's fair. And they can work with you on a case-by-case basis type deal. And again, you can represent yourself pro se if you had to take it to court, pro se just meaning on your own. But of course, there are disability attorneys. There are attorneys who specialize in protecting these civil liberties. And you can contact a local attorney for that as well.
So in your experience, either with your own driving journey after recovering from your brain injury or since you've been in your role as an attorney, what would you say you wish you knew before you had your accident as far as the journey of returning to driving?
Well, so it's interesting. So you ask, what do I wish I knew before the accident about, getting back in the driver's seat and driving my car on my own? It's like, well, I'd only been a driver for about
a year or two,
half a year or a year. Yeah, I hadn't been a driver that long.
Apparently walking was hard.
Right. And I had to relearn how to walk and talk, do everything over again. So driving wasn't really on my mind at all. It really wasn't. But it depends on what life stage you're in. I was 17 years old. So I wasn't, and again, I had just gotten my license or freedom to drive on my own about 6 months before the accident. So I wasn't even that used to driving on my own. And I had so many other issues I had to work through. So for me, there wasn't a whole lot of concern or priority for me to get that license back or be able to drive again. It was just kind of something I just went through. I went through the system and just waited for my turn. Now, that'd be different for someone who's in their mid-20s, someone who's in their 30s, 40s, 50s. They've been driving for a longer period of time, and they've been reliant upon that to work, to put food on the table.
And other people have been reliant on them to be able to drive the kids to school or to daycare and pick them up afterwards.
And so there can be a sense of urgency and frustration in not being able to engage in that in a legal fashion. So for me personally, I don't think I'd have any advice or like what I wish I knew that I think other people might
that's
have.
Okay.
Yeah. So just honestly, I don't think there's anything, but I do think what's important for everybody to know is to really lean into the support systems you have available. So whether it's your friends, whether like if you know other professionals, whether they're legal or healthcare, just lean into those people. And thankfully the internet is available to pretty much everybody. And there are lots of resources out there. And rehabilitation programs here locally, like Fraser or PAM Rehab in Clarksville.
Yeah. Did you ever work with vocational rehab?
Yeah, I did work with Voc Rehab, but they didn't work with the driving stuff. I mean, I guess they probably did, but I don't remember them being part of that. I wasn't really aware of a lot of things that were going on.
That's fair.
Because of the coma and everything. They say when you wake up from a coma, there's still a period of time in which you're still waking up from it. Just because you're like awake doesn't mean you're like fully there
and able to remember
everything. Yeah. So that like first year after the brain injury is pretty hazy for me.
Well, that's okay.
Yeah.
Not trying to dredge up too much. But,
yeah. But
okay. Could you mention something about vocational rehab? Is that something that you would recommend to other people that they look into if they want to get back to work after having a brain injury or a stroke?
Yes, Voc Rehab is essential for getting back to work or even school. They are great. They have a social worker who will help coordinate, a case manager to get you back to work, get you the accommodations, the adaptive technologies that you need for work, for school, whether it's, for the vehicle or just day-to-day tasks like recorders, there's these fancy pens, eyewear, corrective lenses that you might be required to wear for driving. They can help navigate those issues for each person. And it's good to have someone to talk to that's literally their job is to help you get back to work, help you get back to school, get back to doing the things that you either enjoyed doing or know you need to be doing.
And that is a service provided by the state that you're in?
Yep. It's a statewide service that's freely available to people that have been diagnosed with severe strokes or brain injuries or disabilities of any kind. They qualify for the Voc Rehab.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of like one of those hidden gems that a lot of people don't know about. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
And thanks for sharing your wisdom from your own experience as well as your legal commentary. And if you have enjoyed this episode of the Stronger After Stroke podcast, be sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments what was helpful for you or if there are other topics you'd like to learn more about. And I'll see you in the next episode.
You've been listening to Stronger After Stroke, the podcast dedicated to helping stroke survivors continue to thrive after experiencing stroke. Are you a follower of the show? Well, if not, what are you waiting for? Following on your favorite podcast app is the best way to make sure you never miss a single episode. For more information about thriving after stroke, reach out to the Norton Neuroscience Institute Resource Center, where you'll find classes, resources, and patient navigators to help patients and their families improve access to care, address quality of life issues, and find specialized support both virtually and in person. Find out more by calling 502-446-4664 or by clicking on Neuroscience under the services menu at www.nortonhealthcare.com. Also, did you know Stronger After Stroke isn't the only podcast produced by Norton Healthcare? Find other shows by searching for the Norton Healthcare channel in Apple Podcast. Well, that's it for this episode, but we'll be back soon with another episode of Stronger After Stroke, the podcast dedicated to helping stroke survivors and their families thrive after experiencing stroke.